What's going on, Lion fans? Welcome to the Pride Detroit YouTube channel. I'm Meko, joined once again by Ryan Matthews. Ryan's filling in for Morgan because even though Morgan's back from vacation, he is feeling a little under the weather. But once Morgan's feeling better, he's actually going to be joining Ryan and I for what we're about to do today. And I got to give all credit to Ryan on this one for having this idea of kind of a new collection of videos that we'll be doing. For those of you that were huge fans of the podcast, you know, one of the most integral parts of the podcast was that, you know, Ryan, Jeremy, and Chris occasionally would do these listcasts, and they would have to basically rank their top 5 of a number of random things. Some of them football related, a lot of them not. I would say like most cases, they were not very football related. But Ryan, you had this great idea of kind of bringing that element of the podcast to the YouTube channel.
Yeah, Listcast is a deep cut. That was way back in the infancy of the podcast. But, I mean, you summed it up pretty well. It was, at first, the genesis of it was, hey, let's rank all of the positions around the league when it comes to the best players at each spot. And that slowly morphed into your top 5 favorite breakfast items. So it has grown, it has evolved, but we're bringing it back to its roots today. And we're gonna talk about a position that we have some questions about, Meko.
Yeah, and I'm very passionate about this position group. Safety is like by far my favorite position, especially on the defensive side of the football. But on the football field, period, having a great safety on the field is just like the position that I tend to gravitate towards the most. I was a huge Ed Reed fan. You know, he's easily in my top 5 football players of all time. Yeah. And so when PFF basically rolled out this list, I probably, like most Lions fans, went to this list and was like, great, where's Kerby Joseph ranked? And we're going to kind of get into it kind of with the first question here, Ryan. When we talk about the most egregious thing on this list, it has to be that Kerby Joseph isn't on it at all, right?
It seems a bit odd that he isn't a top 32 safety in the NFL. I would have to say that last year wasn't Kerby's best year. I think that even you would be quick to admit that, right? Like his rookie season, he really came on strong, especially once he was given more responsibilities and made a lot of big plays, both in pass coverage as well as showing up here and there in run defense when the team needed to make a play, albeit with a sophomore. I don't even know if I'd call it quite a slump, so to speak, because I think you can explain this, Meko, but I didn't feel like everything last season in terms of, oh man, this went wrong or that went wrong, and Kerby Joseph was in the vicinity. I didn't always think, well, that was Kerby's fault.
Yeah, I will admit, I was much harder on Kerby this past season, probably than I should have been for somebody only going into their second year, but like you kind of illustrated perfectly, Kerby had such a great rookie season, obviously creating turnovers, making plays, always seeming to be exactly where he needed to be. And so I think going into year 2, I held him to a very high standard of like, hey, at the very least, you just need to be in position to make plays. And like you said, a lot of things that went wrong on that defense isn't necessarily his fault, but there were a number of situations I felt like throughout that season where, you know what, he just kind of got a little greedy at times. I think he got a little too happy with wanting to make plays, and that kept him from being in position, or at least being in place to be able to probably impact plays a little bit more so than he did this past season.
Yeah, and I think there was a little bit, too, of the third-round pick making an impact. You know what I mean? And in terms of in his rookie season where you have a guy who you didn't really think that you were going to get a lot out of right out of the box, right? And then he 4 interceptions. He's making some crucial plays here and there. Oh man, Kerby Joseph's phenomenal. He's fantastic. Yeah. You look at some of the numbers though from last season, or from his rookie season rather, to 2023. And I mean, he still had 4 interceptions. Yep. He had 5 pass breakups according to Pro Football Focus. The one thing though that's kind of odd is that in 2023, not charged with any touchdowns while in coverage. His rookie season, he was charged with 5. So you wonder why, hey, like his the NFL passer rating against while in coverage in 2023 was 52.1. His rookie season, it was 89.2. But he was higher rated in 2022. This kind of illustrates PFF's, secret sauce when it comes into a lot of their grades and whatnot, right? And you kind of want to peel back those numbers and you want to dig inside and see the premium stats, which I think are much more valuable. But Meko, I think the one thing that stands out the most to me when I'm looking at Kerby's numbers from last season is his snap count alignment and where he was lining up.
Yeah.
Much different in 2022 than it was 2023, with 244 of his snaps lining up in the box, right? Only 81 his rookie season, playing a lot more free safety his rookie season, not playing so much free safety his sophomore year. That stood out to you too, right?
Yeah, and it was, to me, this is where I think some of the scheme probably did Kerby a disservice, because he's not an in-the-box safety. And I think that became evident not just when Kerby was on the field, but once they brought Ifeatu Melifonwu onto the field and they started putting Iffy in the box a little bit more, you saw a drastic change in how that position was played between the two of them. And I think going into, year 3 for Kerby, I think we will start to see more of him in that free safety role, because I think that's kind of where he's at his best. He's best when he's being rangy, when he's able to go sideline to sideline and make plays on passes down the field, because he does have that athleticism. He does have that vision, and he does have that playmaking ability. But it goes back to what you were saying. Not all of these things with his grade being lowered is necessarily his fault. I think some of these are just poor schematics of putting him in position to make plays that he's not really capable of doing. And not to mention, the Lions did have that injury to CJ GJ last year, which again drastically changed how they wanted to play football, because I think if Chauncey Gardner-Johnson had been healthy, you would have saw him lining up in the box way more than Kerby ever was at that point.
Yeah. And that's going to be probably one of the most interesting aspects of the Lions defense in 2024 is, what does that safety room look like on the field? You have Ifeatu Melifonwu, you have Kerby Joseph, you have Brian Branch, who they said they want him playing more safety too. Who's the odd man out, if there is one, and where are all these guys lining up and where are they making plays? I think this year they're in a much better spot with the guys that they have and being able to put them in positions to succeed.
Yeah, I would agree. I think now that the Lions have a much better grasp of the players that they have on this roster, again, with you having Iffy, Kerby, and Branch as options to play at the safety position, you don't have to go like digging and trying to figure out like, okay, again, once CJ went down last year, all right, well, let's put Tracy Walker out there. And Tracy had already kind of proven in his time in the NFL that he wasn't a great in the box safety. So, okay, let's try Kerby in that role. And now Kirby's not doing well. Well, now if he can play that position very well, and while Brian Branch played a lot of nickel, that would seem to at least illustrate to me that, like, hey, he could be just as good as an in-the-box safety. So I would expect, even though PFF doesn't have Kerby currently ranked among the top 32 safeties, I would expect to see his grade improve and thus seeing him kind of crack this list come next year.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Kerby make his leap into the top 32 at his position next season with all of those personnel upgrades. I totally agree. Who do you think, though, on this list, Meko, is the most overrated? And there are 32 safeties on this list, but yeah, I don't think you have to look past the top 10 to find a name.
No, I don't have to look outside the top 5. Honestly, and this is, again, I'm not trying to pick on one person, but again, if we're talking about just like naturally going through the list, the first place wherever you stop on the list and go, didn't expect to see that name, is probably the person that is probably the most overrated. And for me, it's Marcus Williams out of Baltimore. PFF has him ranked number 5. That's ahead of Javon Holland out of Miami, ahead of Derwin James, with the Chargers. That's a little ahead of Tyrann Mathieu in New Orleans. So that was the first one that for me that I was like, this list is going to be kind of iffy. Even before I got to the realization that Kerby wasn't on it.
Yeah, you had a lot of scrolling to do from where Marcus Williams was ranked to where Kerby Joseph was nowhere to be found. But
yeah,
I think with some of these lists, they do end up becoming a little bit of a legacy list, so to speak, because you have some other names. I mean, I know you mentioned Derwin James, who, ton of talent, right? But whether it's injuries or it's one thing or the other with some of these other guys, like, Marcus Williams is a name, right? There's, Harrison Smith for the Minnesota Vikings is 35 years old. He was incredible 5 years ago. Still a good player, but the 16th ranked safety in the NFL. Not sure if he's quite there anymore, but
right.
There's some other names though that do stand out in terms of like, oh man, they really came back and they really put it all together. I kind of wrote them off, and the one guy that stands out to me in that respect is Jabril Peppers for the New England Patriots. I mean, this is a guy who I think almost kind of got relegated to being like a special teams ace for a second there, as he was wrapping up his career in New York. And I mean, no surprise, he goes to New England, and he's one of the best run defenders at his position in the NFL.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good call out by you, because Jabril is somebody that I very much did start to kind of write off. Like, once he wasn't making those same type of plays that he was making at Michigan, right? They tried playing him at nickel. It wasn't really working out. Tried him at outside corner. That really wasn't working out. And like you said, was starting to get kind of slotted into like, oh, listen, we'll just put him out on special teams and he can go out there and be athletic and make plays. But this goes to show, when you get a player in the right place with the right coaching staff, what they're able to unlock, and just being patient with a player like Jabril Peppers to realize, like, you know what, maybe he does work better in a position like safety, where he has a little bit more range and he has a little bit more option to be able to play coverage, to be able to come up and run support, because he is a good tackler. So it's kind of a testament to one of the few things that New England got right last year with how to utilize Jabril Peppers. But they also had 2 safeties on this list. So again, kudos to that team to be able to have Kyler Duggar and Jabril Peppers both on this list.
Yeah. And Kyle Duggar is just one of those like small school guys that, of course, the New England front office identified. And he's another one of those names too, though, that signed a big extension, right? You had Antoine Winfield, who got paid this offseason, 4 years, $84.1 million. Yep. Kyle Duggar got the extension. As far as like a couple of other names that just stand out to me, and this is kind of like a what if scenario, but Kyle Hamilton at number 2. He was the highest graded safety according to PFF his rookie year in 2022. And he had, almost just as good of a season, if not better, in his second season. But he was a guy that a lot of Lions fans had circled in their mock drafts in 2022. And I mean, the Lions got Aiden Hutchinson, who apparently we're not as high on, I guess, as everybody else, even though like we had glowing remarks and very complimentary things to say about Aiden Hutchinson in our last video. But the second pick, Aiden Hutchinson, was a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Now, I think part of the calculus that comes into play, though, is, well, the Lions were interested in moving up, and they moved up for a skill position player like J-Mo. But would you have liked them to see them double dip on defense and maybe have made a move to get a guy like Kyle Hamilton?
So Kyle Hamilton was the player that like was very close to me being like all like bought in for at 2. Like when I wasn't like super sold in, like I wasn't always sold on Hutch. I was a big Kayvon Thibodeau like supporter at the time. Yeah. But if you were like to talk me out of edge, Kyle Hamilton was it. And it was like, my only concern was I felt like if you were going to take a safety at 2, he had to be Ed Reed. Like you had to guarantee Ed Reed numbers. And I think going into now being 2 years of Kyle Hamilton in the league, he looks to have been that good. And so to answer your question, if the Lions had been able to double dip on defense, absolutely Kyle Hamilton. Because you're now talking about a defense. Maybe you don't draft Kerby Joseph in that situation, but a defense that has Kyle Hamilton on the back end and Aiden Hutchinson on the front end, that's a good unit, Ryan.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And this was something we didn't really talk about in our Hutch episode, though. But I mean, it was those three edge rushers, right? It was Trayvon Walker, it was Kayvon Thibodeau, it was Aiden Hutchinson. And since the Lions didn't have the first pick, you had to do a lot of research on all three guys. But then there was always like Kyle Hamilton that was like, well, you know what? Like he might be the best football player, bar none.
Yeah.
When it comes to a defensive player in this draft. And it's been hard to argue that. It's been hard to argue that through his first 2 seasons. Incredible talent. Would love a player like Kyle Hamilton to be in Detroit's back end there on their defense. But another thing that stands out to me as far as things I noticed when I was looking at this top 10, Meko, was all of the guys who they're on like their second, maybe third team.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because, as mentioned, Winfield 1, has been with the Bucks, Kyle Hamilton 2, the Ravens. But then you get to Jesse Bates, who, started in Cincinnati and now he's with Atlanta. Mika Fitzpatrick, a player who was traded from the Dolphins to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Marcus Williams at number 5 is somebody who started with the New Orleans Saints. Number 8, somebody new to the NFC North, and Xavier McKinney, who started his career at the New York Giants, and now he signed that mega deal. 4 years, $67 million to come over and play in Green Bay. Tyrann Mathieu is somebody who's been all around in the league. It's really interesting how I'm looking at this list and saying, seems like teams like you either have a generational safety or you kind of just move through them.
Yeah, I think that's something that doesn't get talked about nearly enough, is that like the teams that have great safeties will hold on to those safeties up until it's almost like in the same sense of corners, right? Like once corners get to like 28, 29, teams start looking like, all right, we can probably move on to the next thing. I think the same thing is kind of true with safeties in that you don't typically see teams hold on to safeties like they did when when teams had Ed Reeves or Brian Dawkins or Troy Polamalu, like that were lifers with teams for the most part. Safeties start to get up there in age, and it might have something to do with, again, how the game is played on the offensive end with so many speedsters. And it's like, you can't afford to have a safety that's not, uber athletic. So once it gets to that point where, again, safeties start wanting 20 plus million a year.
Yeah.
Well, we can go find another great safety in the second or third round of this draft and kind of plug them in to do, some of these things that these older players are doing. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying, like, those first 4 or 5 on this list, relatively young guys that have been in the league, less than 9 years. But the middle part of this list is a bunch of guys that have been on the league for, again, 8, 9 years. They're still good, but they've probably either moved around a lot, unless you're Harrison Smith and you probably have some dirt on the Minnesota Vikings for some reason. But other than that, like those guys, yeah, they typically move around quite a bit.
Yeah. And to that point, too, we talked about a lot of guys like Duggar and Antoine Winfield getting contracts. How many safeties do you really see get like 2 mega contracts, right? It's almost like they get one big one, and then by the time they're 28, 29 years old, teams are thinking about getting cheaper at the position or getting younger at the position. Here's something that's kind of off the beaten path, because I know we were talking like a few questions about these PFF rankings at safety. But did you notice that the Minnesota Vikings have 3 safeties on this list?
I did.
And Kerby Joseph isn't on the list at all?
Yeah. And don't get me wrong. I think Harrison Smith has been solid, right? For like the entirety of his career, he's kind of like very reliable at that safety position.
Yeah.
What is the other safety? Josh Metellus was very good this year. Right, especially when blitzing and providing like support and run defense. Thought he was very good. I can't name the third safety, Ryan.
Cameron Bynum, who apparently, according to PFF, 104 tackles. I mean, the guy very active as a run defender. How are they using all these guys? Did I not watch enough Minnesota Vikings tape? Was I too enamored with the fact that Nick Mullins was, crapping down the side of his leg to finish off their season, or what?
I think I will say this: Minnesota's defense was much improved, and I think when you do go back, and I think when you go back and watch it, a lot of it does have to do with a combination of their safety play. So again, Metellus and Smith playing really well, and then like how they were utilizing their linebackers, but kind of in a sneaky way, the Vikings were doing something that the Lions started doing later in the season, where again they started blitzing their safeties a lot more, getting their safeties involved in the run game, and so that's probably where with them probably having issues at the linebacker position or just deciding to go with more 3 safety looks, that's how you get all 3 of those safeties on the field, and they're all making plays both in the pass and run game.
Oh, yeah. And I'm even looking here, too, right? Like Cameron Bynum, all these guys, and to your point, too, Meko, like over 1,100 snaps for Cameron Bynum. Josh Metellus, 1,063. Harrison Smith, over 1,000. Like, all these guys played over 1,000 snaps, but they just used them in really interesting ways because it was that Brian Flores, all gas, no brakes. We're going to blitz the ever-loving crap out of you, and we're going to send pressure, and we're going to make the most out of – because that's the other thing, too. The Minnesota Vikings defense, not high on talent last year.
No.
Not a ton of guys that you would be like, hey, all pro, Pro Bowl. I mean, no, those guys just weren't there. And Brian Flores, credit to him. I mean, talk about a guy who deserves another chance to be an NFL head coach at any minute now. But with Cameron Bynum, I noticed a lot of play in the slot. Even with Metellus and also with Harrison Smith, like moving around. Like Metellus played like 396 snaps in the slot. Bynum played 282. But they're all just all over the place. And Harrison Smith, though, has that kind of reputation as being that box safety because he is so utilized in run defense and things like that. But 3 Minnesota Vikings safeties all on one list. 32 safeties on this list, Meko.
And the Lions can get 1. And I think that goes to show kind of like some little bit of optimism that I have for the Lions going into this year, where even if you do have Kerby Joseph, Iffy, and Brian Branch, you can still utilize all 3 of those guys in really unique ways so that they can all be impactful for your football team. I think you look at a team like what Minnesota did and say, like, no, we can still employ all of these guys in different matchups and again, keep your defense multiple enough to where you don't have to be caught off guard by different mismatches. Brian Branch is solid. And I think just about everything he does, there's not a thing that I look at Brian Branch and say like, he can't do that very well. You look at Ifeatu Melifonwu, who really came on last year and really showed off his versatility, being able to cover deep, being able to blitz, being a really strong tackler. And Kerby is the most ideal center fielder that you can have for your defense. So with all 3 of those guys taking on different roles and responsibilities, you again allow your defense to just be very unpredictable, but can almost force offenses to cater to you instead of being at their mercy.
Yeah, that's a great point that you made right there, because I think the easiest way for the Lions to get a player on this list is just play Brian Branch more safety snaps, because he's a top 16 safety right off the bat. Right. You move him from slot corner to safety and it's like, okay, top 16 guy right there.
I was going to say it's between Brian Branch or Iffy for me. Iffy played a limited amount of snaps last year, just under 400 snaps when he started playing, but was the Lions' highest graded safety, like by a good margin too, between him and Kerby. So that's limited games, that's limited amount of snaps, but highly effective in his play. So the thing that's just going to be tough for Iffy is, well, how do you get on the field when you have so many players in the secondary? Like, not even just at safety, right? Not just besides Kerby and Brian Branch, but Amik Robertson has been turning heads in camp so far. We know that Carlton Davis and more than likely Terrion Arnold are going to be manning the corner spots. And all of those corners can literally line up anywhere, Ryan. They don't all have to be exclusively outside corners. They can all play in the slot. They can all play on the outside. If he's going to have to continue to show that the same plays that he was making last year, he can make this year, and hopefully that'll be the thing that helps him get onto the field.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter at the end of the day, right? Like wherever Brian Branch is best served and best utilized in this defense, put him there. Wherever Ifeatu Melifonwu is most effective, put him there. I think we can all agree, though, after watching 2 years of Kerby Joseph, like you said, that guy is – he has wide receiver instincts, right? So he just needs to play in the middle of that field and play free safety. That's where that guy should be. And then they can kind of fill in wherever they need. But the corner thing is a really interesting thing to keep in mind as we get ready here for training camp and everything, that there's a lot of moving pieces, and that's a huge headache for opposing offenses. So I think as far as predictions go, like I'm going to say that I think Kerby Joseph makes the jump into the top 32. Yeah. If they, I don't know. I'm looking at the PFF list. I'm looking at the article right now. I don't see like their criteria listed out. Like you had to play X number of snaps at safety. So who knows if Brian Branch plays even enough for them to quote unquote categorize him as a safety.
Sure.
Okay. He's on the list too. So all of a sudden now the same conversation we just had about the Minnesota Vikings, we might be having about the Detroit Lions next season, where we might have 6 of the top safeties in the NFC North.
I mean, that was going to be my bold prediction, right? I think the Lions could very well have 2, if not 3 safeties on this list next year.
Okay. Yeah, I'm on board. I like that. I don't know if he will get there, but I think 2's a slam dunk.
Yeah. Yeah, because to your point, if Brian Branch gets that other safety spot, Kirby's going to be back there. I could see them both making this list come next year.
Yeah.
Or this upcoming season. I keep saying next year. This upcoming season. So, no, Ryan, that's going to pretty much do it for this conversation. But let us know in the comment section what you guys think of PFF's latest rankings of the top safeties. What do you think about them leaving Kerby Joseph off? Do you think that was a good decision? Do you think he's being overlooked? And looking ahead to this upcoming season, how many safeties do you think the Lions could actually have on this list? Could it be 1? Could it be 2? Or could they pull a Minnesota Vikings and have 3 safeties on this list? Let us all know that in the comment section below. And like always, if you're looking for any more Lions-focused content, be sure to head over to the Pride of Detroit website, where new articles are being uploaded daily over there. And be sure to tune in to the Pride of Detroit YouTube channel, where all you have to do is hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and that's going to keep you plugged into all the new content that we upload over here on the POD YouTube channel. So with all that said, I'm Meko. He's Ryan. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.